morning everyone, it's Catherine Chahar here, and today's training session is on fractions, decimals and percentages in Key Stage 1. This video and the videos in this series have been put together by Cristan, the maths lead at Higher Lane Primary School.
This video will introduce you to fractions, decimals and percentages in Key Stage 1. Here is an overview of how the concepts of fractions, decimals and percentages progresses through the primary curriculum.
So take your time to have a look through here. So this is from reception 1, 2, 3 and 4.
As you can see, it is a progressive map, therefore what is taught in the previous years is expected to be secure knowledge by the time they get to that next year group. So we build on the skills as the children go through primary school. This slide explores the vocabulary associated with fractions, decimals and percentages. It is vital that the children understand and use the correct vocabulary.
So the key words for fractions, so we've got the keyword fractions, so any parts of a whole. So that's when you divide something into equal pieces. Each piece is a fraction of the whole thing. We've got the numerator, the top number, and the denominator, the bottom number. We've got terms of common fraction or proper fraction, improper or top-heavy fractions, mixed numbers, equivalent fractions, and then reducing, simplifying or cancelling down. Please take the time to have a read through this key vocabulary and make notes on any of the tricky terms that you may struggle with.
In Year 1, we begin by looking at what the concept of whole means. This is best done using images and items that the children can relate to, for example, an apple. Concrete objects at this stage are essential in ensuring firm foundations for developing this concept.
So we've got what is a whole. So a whole is a thing that is complete in itself. And what is a half? So a half is one of two equal parts. So we take an object and cut it into two equal parts. One of those parts is called a half. And it's really important that we know that two equal halves make a whole.
Once the children understand the whole is a thing that is complete in itself, then we begin to explain halves, and the fact that two halves make a whole. Again, continuing to use concrete apparatus is key here. Use the real world to reinforce the concept that a half is one of two equal parts. For example, collecting leaves and sticks, then breaking them in half. Once the concept has been embedded, begin to introduce it to simple 2D shapes also. This is where we also use pictorial representations like the triangle image you can see here.
So a really good point on here, it says to find a half we do not always need to cut it into two. We can colour half or draw a line to show where half is. And that's a really good thing to remember in class.
Next we move on, so the children are considering finding halves of a quantity. This is where we combine concrete, pictorial and also include some abstract too. Physically sharing objects so the children grasp the concept again.
So again, talking of having a quantity, so we already know that a half is one of two equal parts, so we're sharing between two. So each person must get the same amount. So for example, finding half of the 6 cherries, we need to share them equally between 2 people, so each person would get 3. Half of 6 is 3.
When the children have grasped halving with smaller numbers, then we can start to introduce larger numbers and expand on the range of concrete resources, including deans.
So we can use the same strategy as before. So finding half of 26, so we're going to make the number using the deans, then we're going to half the tens and half the units. And we can do that by physically moving the objects away from each other.
The next step is to talk about quarters with the children, again revisiting key vocabulary such as equal. Share with the children that quarters means finding 4 equal parts of a whole or given quantity. A great way to do this is to give the children practical opportunities where they can explore the concept, for example, folding pieces of paper. Practical activities also provide an opportunity to explore misconceptions. As seen here, a child may understand that quarters means 4 parts, but has not yet grasped 4 equal parts. It is important that these misconceptions are identified and addressed early on before they embed in a child's understanding. Similarly to the process of exploring halves, when introducing quarters, start with concrete and practical activities, then introduce the pictorial images like the simple 2D shapes you can see here. Allow the children time to experiment with the pictorial representations. This again provides an opportunity to ascertain their true level of understanding and demonstrate any misconceptions they may have before it becomes an issue.
It's very interesting on the first section of this slide over here, if it's a shade 1/4 of each shape, the circle in the bottom right corner is split into 4 parts, but not into 4 equal parts. And that's a really good point to make, that children may still colour one of those parts in. It's important they need to recognise that those parts are not equal.
It is important to make it explicit that fractions is a concept that is progressive. Point out the links so the children understand they are building on what they already know. Next, we introduce finding fractions of a quantity. Practical sharing activities will assist with this objective. Once the concept has been introduced and explored, we can start to ask the children to apply their understanding to more complex questions like these. We will now look at how fractions, decimals and percentages is taught in Year 2. Now we build on the children's understanding that fractions are part of wholes.
So in Year 2 we're going to look at what is a fraction. So there's lots of different fractions, but they're all written with one number above a line and one number below the line. The top number is the numerator and the bottom number is the denominator. Denominator is really important. It tells us how many equal parts the whole has been divided into. And the numerator tells us how many parts has been coloured, shaded, taken, eaten.
Next, we will look at how fractions are recorded again. The children need to be exposed to the correct vocabulary. Initially, numerator. This is a top number in a fraction. It tells you how many parts of a whole.
So for example, with the cookie in the corner, this giant cookie has been divided into quarters. 2 quarters have been eaten. So how many quarters are left? So it's been split into 4 because it's in quarters. So 4 is the denominator, it goes on the bottom. And the fact that 2 are left, the 2 is the numerator and that goes on top.
Then we also learned that a denominator is the bottom number and represents the whole. We would model how to find the numerator and denominator using practical resources. The next step is to start connecting the dots, so to speak. Now we can start to show the children that there are equivalent fractions. So, for example, 2 quarters is the same as 1/2.
So this is where children can learn about equivalent fractions and begin to make the connections.
Visual representations are helpful at this stage as they help the children see fractions that are equal.
So 1/2 and 2 quarters are called equivalent fractions. They both give us the same amount. So the amount that they give us is equal. Equivalent, equal.
The children have already learnt what 1/4 means, what it looks like on a shape and how to find 1/4 of a quantity. Now explain to the children that we can increase the numerator to find more parts of the whole.
So if we go back to this example, it says finding 3/4 of a set of objects. So there's 20 counters, and to find 3/4 of the counters. So we need to begin by splitting the counters up into 4 groups, and then we're going to be adding 3 of those groups together so that we are having 3 out of 4 of those groups.
We would introduce this pictorially with shapes and shading parts of the shape, then extending this to include numbers too. Children need to understand how to write fractions. This needs to be modelled to them as it has in these examples here.
So here we've got the fractions where children have drawn them. So we're using the squared paper to help make sure that all the pieces and parts within there are equal. We can also write the fractions by writing out counters or doing jottings for the fraction.
Once the children have a secure understanding of basic fractions, we can start to introduce problem-solving tasks so they can demonstrate their understanding and apply it to similar situations to these examples here.
So here are a couple of examples. So first one, so half of 14. We know that the half has got a denominator of 2, therefore we know that we're sharing the whole 14 into 2 equal parts. So we can move the counters or we can make jottings around and show that we've split them into 2 equal parts of 7. And the same principle can be done for the finding 1/4 of 20. You can use physical counters, jottings, anything that children need to help them visualise how they are finding the fractions.
Thank you for watching and listening to this presentation today. Please feel free to contact me on the email that you can see on the screen should you need any further advice or clarification.
Thank you very much, Cristan, for putting this video together. Our next training session will be looking at lower key stage 2 fractions.